Well, welcome to this edition of the 700 Club. The forces of freedom were winning in Venezuela until the Russians stepped in. Whatever happened to the Monroe Doctrine? Venezuela dictator Nicolas Maduro was actually ready to flee, had a plane ready to go. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the plane was gassed up and ready for takeoff, and then Russia convinced Maduro to stay around. What about the Monroe Doctrine? Why don't we move in? We cannot have a Russian satellite on our southern border. But now forces loyal to both sides are fighting in the streets. It could be a horrible bloodbath. And I heard one commentator say, well, do you want to send American troops? Not really, but I would like to send American drones and military to be on the border. A few tanks, a few guns, and I think the deal will flip, but we cannot allow chaos to develop on our border. George Thomas has more.
In a video posted on social media, opposition leader Juan Guaido urged Venezuelans to take to the streets again today and called on the country's powerful military to join the people seeking change. Guaido claims the military, seen as a linchpin to whether the embattled president remains in power, is deserting his government.
We now know for sure that the claim that the regime has control of the armed forces is false.
Overnight, the head of Venezuela's secret police broke ranks with Maduro, saying the time had come to rebuild the country and seek new ways of doing politics. National Security Advisor John Bolton says Venezuela's Minister of Defense, Supreme Court Chief Justice, and Commander of the Presidential Guard have pledged to support opposition leader Juan Guaido. Bolton is urging them to make good on their promises. On Tuesday, violent confrontations erupted in pockets of Venezuela's capital city, Caracas, between Guaido's military supporters and Maduro's regime loyalists. The White House endorsing Guaido's latest bid to oust Maduro, while warning Cuba to stay out of the South American nation, threatening to impose sanctions on the communist country for its role in the crisis. The U.S. says about 20,000 Cuban troops and agents are working to prop up the Venezuelan dictator.
Obviously, we are seeing the Venezuelan people strive to get a government that they control, not have a government controlled by an authoritarian military regime that in turn is controlled by Cubans and other forces external to Venezuela.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed Maduro was about to relinquish power and even had a plane on the tarmac ready to leave the country for Cuba, but was urged by Russia to stay.
We literally had Nicolas Maduro getting prepared to get on this airplane and head out of the country before he stopped really at the direction of the Russians.
Russia's meddling is a clear sign to the administration that it's pushing against America's Monroe Doctrine, which limits the influence of foreign governments in our hemisphere. While past American presidents may have neglected the doctrine, Trump's stance indicates the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well. All this happening as Guaido released a short video early Tuesday showing him standing alongside members of the military, claiming he had supported the country's soldiers and urging Venezuelans to take on Maduro. That led to fierce skirmishes between opposition and government supporters, including this moment when an armored military vehicle was seen running over civilians. But by nightfall, the socialist dictator appeared still in control of the country, with his Minister of Defense and other military officials by his side. A defiant Maduro said all attempts to remove him from office had failed and vowed to punish those trying to overthrow his government. George Thomas, CBN News.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am not a warmonger. I like peace, we all do. But there are times that the police need to step in to hold kidnappers responsible. A small group of thugs have kidnapped a country and are holding the poor people hostage. We will not have to have a flood of refugees from Venezuela. They are perfectly capable of setting up their own government, and they have one, and they'll have free elections and all the rest of it. But I do think it's time we have some of those drones. We don't have to send troops, but we just need to have some of the equipment that is available to us on standby to show the Venezuelan military that they are not alone, and that if they surrender, They will have amnesty. We will not prosecute them. And these militias that are on the sides will be dealt with swiftly. But we have the capability with our drones of doing enormous amount of support for the Guaido resistance. But we cannot just say, well, we're going to put sanctions on Cuba and we're staying with you and we think it's wonderful what you're doing and we clap and applaud. Wouldn't it be great if you had a gang of thugs take over a neighborhood in one of our cities and the FBI said, well, we're going to stand by and applaud and we will issue sanctions against their leaders while at the same time they're killing and harassing the population? We wouldn't stand for that. And I think the same thing is true in Venezuela. We've got to act on it, but we don't have to send troops in. There are other nations like Brazil and others who will be perfectly willing to supply troops if needed. But we have to offer at least the military support. We have huge weaponry, and all we have to do is put some of it in the hands of the people who are fighting for democracy. But we've got to act. I don't think we can just allow this thing to simmer and say, well, we hope that we'll have sanctions against the leadership. Nonsense. Well, in other news, Special Counsel Robert Mueller said he didn't like Attorney General William Barr's summary of his report on the Russia investigation. Charlene Aaron has more.
That's right, Pat. Mueller criticized the Attorney General's 4-page memo of his report on the Russia investigation. In a letter to Barr sent after he released the memo in late March, Mueller wrote that the document did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of his report, and that it created confusion about some results of the investigation. In a follow-up phone call with Barr, Mueller said that the document is not inaccurate or misleading, but he did ask the Attorney General to release introductions and executive summaries included in the report. Barr faces the Senate Judiciary Committee today, where he's sure to face questions about Mueller's criticism. And Democratic leadership met with President Trump at the White House Tuesday to discuss rebuilding America's infrastructure. That includes roads, broadband, and the power grid. They say the president agreed to invest $2 trillion into a new plan. Both House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say that the meeting with President Trump was productive.
And it was a very constructive meeting. It's clear that both the White House and all of us want to get something done on infrastructure in a big and bold way. And there was goodwill in this meeting, and that was different than some of the other meetings that we've had, which is a very good thing.
And the president reportedly said he is ready to do a deal, and White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney questioned if it's likely the administration can work with this Congress. Pat?
You know, under the Obama administration, there was close to $1 trillion allocated for so-called infrastructure, and the truth is almost all of it went to leading activist groups who supported the Democrat Party, and hardly anything. They kept talking about shovel-ready projects. They didn't really have many shovel-ready, and that money was absolutely wasted. It's been suggested, and I will put this on the table because it's already there. It's not my idea, but it was a good one. The Federal Reserve has a war chest now of something in the neighborhood of $4 trillion. Now, it was suggested, why not let the Federal Reserve take those funds that they have available already and use them or loan them to the administration for infrastructure, because to spend $2 trillion would be highly inflationary. To raise it in taxes would be crippling. Where are you going to get the money? It's got to come from somewhere. And if all it does is add to our deficit, we can't afford it. But the Fed has the money, and they've built it up, and it's one of those things that might not even cause a ripple in the economy if they find it. So it's something that ought to be considered, but let's face it, our bridges are collapsing, our sewer systems are breaking down, our roads are potholed, and our civilian air transportation grid is down, and many computer systems aren't working. There are all kinds of things that need to get done. But we cannot have this as a piggy bank for the left. We can't have it as the piggy bank for the right. It can't be a big pot of money that's going to be passed out to special interest groups. It's got to be really spent on infrastructure. Do we trust the politicians to do it? Well, somebody's got to, but they sure need to be held accountable. Charlene?
Pat, health care is the leading issue on the campaign trail. Now it's dominating the halls of Congress. A House committee is looking at a bill that would take health care away from private companies and hand it over to Uncle Sam. Washington reporter Amber Strong has the story.
While a number of the 2020 presidential candidates have jumped aboard the Medicare for All train, House Republicans and even a few Democrats are still at the station, waiting on another ride.
Medicare for all really means Medicare for none. Indeed, this bill is a socialist proposal.
So my Republican friends want to use a lot of scary words like government takeover and socialism today. Have at it.
That bill from Congresswomen Debbie Dingell and Pramila Jayapal includes a quick transition to a single-payer government-ran system.
We cover everyone. Everyone. Not just children, not just seniors, not just those who are healthy, not just those who have to get below a poverty threshold.
Witnesses during Tuesday's hearing, including patients and providers, covered the pros and cons of government health care.
But never before have I given a speech without my natural voice. ALS now means paying out of pocket for almost 24-hour home care. This costs us $9,000 every month. We are cobbling together the money from friends and family and supporters all over the country. But this is an absurd way to run a healthcare system.
We do know from the experience of other countries that global budgets and centrally determined benefit structures lead to rationing, waiting lines, and lower quality of care.
While many on both sides of the aisle agree the system is broken, experts contend the cost would be astronomical.
This is not an analysis of whether Medicare for All is good policy or bad policy. It's purely a cost projection. Total federal spending on Medicare for All over the first 10 years would be somewhere between $54.6 trillion and $60.7 trillion.
Since the midterms, health care consistently remains a top priority for voters.
Health care, yes.
Why is that?
Because I'm a retiree, and I'm very concerned about my health care.
While presidential candidates are split on how to tackle the issue, Senator Bernie Sanders backs a similar plan eliminating private insurance altogether. On Monday, former VP Joe Biden took a more modest approach.
Whether you're covering it through your employer or on your own or not, you all should have a choice to be able to buy into a public option plan for Medicare. Your choice.
And that's the key difference, because Biden and Sanders consistently top the polls among 2020 Democratic contenders. Time will tell which health care option drives the greater turnout. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Definitely a huge issue, Pat.
Well, you know, folks, if you go to the grocery store, I go to the grocery store, and I look at a bag of potatoes, and I say, well, how much is this bag? And it's 10 pounds, and it costs so much money. And I say, all right, that's the price, and that's what I'm going to pay. Or I can't afford to pay that much for potatoes. I need to get one that costs half as much. But you see, I'm negotiating because I'm the buyer. But in health care, we, as the buyers, have not a clue what money is going out. You go to a hospital, and they have all these charges, and the average patient doesn't even see the bill. You go to a doctor, you don't have a clue as to what he's charging you. So where do you get the money? Well, it comes from an insurance program, or it comes from your employer, and so, or it comes from the federal government. But there's a disconnect between the recipient of the care and the provider of the care. And until we fix that, we never are going to get the cost of health care down. We need something where we have a line that forces hospitals to be more efficient, and we force doctors not to have unnecessary proceedings. The threat of litigation about health care is unbelievable. And so the doctors are forced, and hospitals are forced, to practice protective medicine. They have to give unnecessary tests because some lawyer will haul them into court and say you didn't have all the tests before you did this procedure. And so the costs go up enormously because of litigation. So there needs to be tort reform. We need to go at this instead of saying, well, keep the costs where they are. It's trillions of dollars, so tough luck, but the government's going to pay for it all. That's crazy. We need to have some system of getting the cost of health care down. Then we can start talking about who pays for it. But the idea of having one government program, I don't want to be having the thing like the Veterans Administration where people are dying while they wait for hospital care. We can't have that. Charlene?
A brutal storm system is bringing tornadoes, heavy rains, and flooding to the country. At least 7 tornadoes were reported Tuesday, this one sweeping through Oklahoma and devastating homes. Heavy rains has forecasters issuing flood warnings in 10 states, stretching from the upper Midwest to the Gulf Coast. In Davenport, Iowa, waters breached a levee, forcing evacuations from downtown. Today, 13 million people ranging from northeastern Texas to Missouri are in the path of potentially dangerous storms. NASA's administrator says a destructive meteor could strike Earth in our lifetimes. Jim Brendenstein told fellow scientists at a planetary defense conference they must be prepared to protect the Earth. He cited a 2013 meteor crash in a remote area of Russia. It injured 1,600 people with shock waves stronger than 20 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Scientists say an 1,100-foot wide asteroid nicknamed the God of Chaos will pass close to Earth in 2029. Well, new medical research reveals effective ways to fight back against cancer, heart disease, and depression. And the answer might be right in your pantry. As CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson explains, the key to self-healing is feeding our bodies the right foods.
When it comes to life's big decisions, what to eat ranks pretty low on our to-do list.
How do you decide what to eat?
By whatever I have in my cabinet at the time.
I eat whatever my wife makes for me.
Do you snack?
Definitely, sometimes. Well, most of the time I snack.
According to Dr. William Lee, new science proves that's definitely the wrong approach.
There's no superfood or super diet, but it's really about how our body responds to what we put into it.
Research tells us we have within our bodies amazing natural defense systems designed to protect us against our scariest diseases. Here's the catch. They require nourishment from healthy foods, like olive oil.
Because while medicines can be used to treat disease, foods can prevent the disease in the first place.
In his book, Eat to Beat Disease, Dr. Lee lists 200 foods that fuel our natural defense systems, such as the microbiome, the mixture of good and bad bacteria in our gut. Fermented foods and fiber enrich the microbiome, and surprisingly, even sourdough and pumpernickel breads.
Turns out that sourdough is made with Lactobacillus reuteri. In fact, it's that bacteria that creates that nice tangy taste. That bacteria boosts our immune system. Pumpernickel bread, which is made from rye flour, R-Y-E. Rye flour will actually decrease the levels of an unhealthy bacteria in our gut that creates a toxin that causes inflammation.
We all know DNA contains our genetic code, but it's much more than that. Our DNA also tells our body what to do. Unfortunately, it's a fragile system, constantly under attack from things like UV rays, secondhand smoke, and gasoline fumes. Certain foods, like tomatoes, help our DNA stand strong under attack.
Almost 36,000 men have been studied, and it was found that those who ate 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes, that's tomato sauce, per week had a 30% decreased risk of developing prostate cancer.
Thanks to our own stem cells, bodies can renew themselves.
So when we were kids, we were taught that salamander and starfish regenerate, but people can't. Science is turning that upside down. We know that we do regenerate from the inside out using our stem cells.
Turns out chocolate can be a super fuel for these cells.
And I write about, in my book, a study looking at men who have coronary disease. And when they were given dark cocoa, the chocolate alone was able to double the number of stem cells in their bloodstream. And when they measured the reaction of their blood flow, they were able to double that as well. So it's quite remarkable.
That flow travels through some 60,000 miles of vessels, delivering oxygen and nutrients to our cells. That highway is a system called angiogenesis. While it feeds vital organs, it can also feed cancer cells. We balance angiogenesis through a healthy diet.
You don't want too much, you don't want too little, you want to have just right. Think about Goldilocks.
Vitamin K2 is key to controlling angiogenesis, which you can get through Gouda, Jarlsberg, and Edam cheeses.
This vitamin K2, which is a healthy side effect of making the cheese itself, is a powerful anti-angiogenic, cancer-starving substance.
Some foods feed all of our natural defense systems, like kiwi fruit and green and black tea.
And it turns out there's natural chemicals that are called catechins that are in these teas that can do everything from cut off the blood supply to cancers, to boosting our immune system, to even act as a prebiotic to help feed our healthy gut bacteria.
So by understanding which foods support our body's natural defense systems, we're better equipped to live strong, vibrant lives well into old age. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
To get your free healthy food shopping guide, just go to cbnnews.com. Pat, back to you.
Thank you. Hey, how about that? Do you like chocolate?
Yes. I made some brownies last night with dark chocolate, Dutch processed chocolate.
Well, forget the brownie stuff. I think the chocolate. But really, I love. But you've got to have at least 72% cocoa in them, and you know some of them 100%. It's a little bitter, but I take a couple squares of that stuff every day. I also take ubiquinol, which is a CoQ10 thing. It's very good for your heart, and you know, I just, you know, I used to tell my wife, I said, dear, do you read the label? Well, not really. Well, I said, will you please read what's in this stuff that you're bringing home? Mm-hmm. And I tell the people who are working, you know, get me the food that is right. And, you know, if you read the labels, you see how much sugar there is and stuff, so much salt is in things. And the whole idea that he's talking about lycopene, which is in tomatoes, really good. And that resveratrol, which is in red wine, you really can't drink enough wine to get enough resveratrol, but there are pills you can take that do that. But this is interesting. How do you get well? I mean, the body wants to eat the food to make you well, but you need greens, you need roughage, you need the good stuff, not a lot of processed food. And if you eat it you know, all these fast food things, you're going to get terribly sick.
You really are. And you know, I know you're not a fan of the brownies, but these are homemade brownies. Oh. If I make the brownies with the brownie mix, it makes me sick.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't even read all the ingredients. But there's just, you know, like 4 or 5 ingredients in homemade brownies.
Well,
so
you bring us some someday, and we'll see. I'll be glad to be a guinea pig.
The proof is in the pudding.
Brownies. All right, the book that Dr. Lee has written is called Eat to Beat Disease. It's a very pretty cover. It's a great, big, thick book. Got all this stuff in it, all these various recipes. And he's got it right. And, you know, they say that if you got cancer, the sugar feeds cancer. And if you can cut out the sugar, it'll start starving up the cancer. And if you're taking chemo or something, the chemo will be much more effective if you don't have sugar. And so, you know, and I used to know when I was doing my workout with big weights and stuff, that if I ate sugar, something sweet before, I mean, it took my strength away tremendously. Unbelievable. I mean, you know, at least 20%, you just don't have the strength. Why? Because sugar is not good for you, and it's in everything, including high fructose corn syrup. We tell you, well, stay away from it, get healthy, live a long time. I can promise you, if you want to live a long time, some people say, I've had it, I'd just soon leave. But if you like this earth that you live on, you might as well be healthy while you're in it.